Hello, thanks for joining me again today for another of our Unfolding the Word of God studies. We're in the midst of a study of 1 Kings chapter 19, examining the issue of discouragement and depression as it impacts on people's lives, learning from the example God gave us in this chapter of an event transpiring in the life of Elijah, the great prophet. I'm going to pick up our reading today in chapter 19 of 1 Kings, beginning in verse 3. Then he, meaning Elijah, was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. The last couple of days, we've been looking at the issue of triggers for discouragement, things that happen that set us up, things that happen that, in a sense, pull the rug out from underneath us and put us into a place where we fall headlong into periods of discouragement and depression. We saw how sometimes these triggers can be the reality of good times, that being in the midst of a great blessing, a great time of victory, sets us up because times of discouragement can follow quickly on the heels of it. We saw how times of exhaustion, allowing ourselves to be overextended, can also set us up for the fall. We saw how facing times of unexpected change also can set us up for discouragement. And we ended by examining the topic that when we hold preconceived ideas of how God is going to work, what's really going to be his plan, and then things don't happen according to those preconceived ideas, we end up falling into discouragement and depression. Now today, I want to continue in our study, now that we understand some of these preconditions, some of these triggers that can bring about these difficult times of discouragement and depression. I want to begin to look at the specific steps that were beginning to be taken by Elijah that pulled him into the pits. So let's look at them together. The first of these steps, and we'll start today to look at it, the slip and slide into the pits in his life began when there was a shift within him from a place of faith into a place of fear. He began to be a person characterized by fear, not confidence in God. His spiritual walk dramatically changed from the 18th chapter in the miracles on Mount Carmel to now the 19th chapter, shortly occurring just a few hours really later, into a totally different environment, and his life was a totally different one. When he faced the unexpected, meaning he wasn't anticipating that Jezebel and King Ahab would be still opposing the movements of God and after him. When he encountered the reality that wasn't going to happen, instead they were after him, Jezebel was trying to promise to take his life, he moved into a period of time of great fear. Elijah, who was so bold just hours before on the mountaintop, now becomes fearful when he's in the city. What a shift. Bold, powerful, fearful, running. Ever found that type of shift occur in your life in very quick order? Not just a gradual drift, but a almost overnight kind of shift from confidence and boldness in the Lord into fear and into discouragement. Giving in to fear was the first real step in the face of these uncontrolled circumstances that pulled Elijah into the pits. I want to underscore something for you. Please understand me. As wonderful as the Mount Carmel episode was in chapter 18, and I've already talked about that episode and how it really is one of those highlights in the Old Testament demonstrating God's power, understand that Mount Carmel episode was no ultimate protection for Elijah. He fell into the problem we're talking about within hours of having been in that remarkable picture of God's power and grace and strength. He had seen firsthand the miracles and power of God. And yet, with changed circumstances, that did not keep him from the pits that he found himself in. He now, despite knowing the power of God and seeing the miraculous hand of God, found that he was afraid of the threats that were being made against his life. And by the way, there was nothing new in the threats. He had been threatened for the whole previous 3 years because he had been seen as responsible for the difficult times in Israel, the drought, the lack of rain. Nonetheless, he got this threat from Jezebel, and he gave in to fear. I really believe that in this we learn an important principle, and it is this principle. Miracle seeking is not a solution to fear. If we see miracles, they will not in themselves keep us from dropping rapidly into the kind of response to unforeseen circumstances that we see in Elijah's life. Or let's put it a different way. More miracles are not the answer to times of discouragement. More miracles are not the answer to times of discouragement. Why? Because true spirituality, true mature discipleship doesn't spring from the spectacular. It springs from the confidence in the promises of God. Miracles do not in themselves cause that to happen. Can you remember that principle? So again, the first step in the slide into the pits was giving in to fear instead of continuing to live with confidence in the God who had already shown himself powerful and purposeful in his actions in Elijah's life. The second step in this sliding, and I think we'll end with this discussion today, was that Elijah allowed his fear to lead him to run away from the call of God on his life. He ran away from where God wanted him to be. God wanted him in Jezreel. He wanted him there opposing the actions of Ahab and Jezebel to try to turn Israel toward Baal worship. He ran. In a way, his actions reflected the actions of Jonah. You remember the book of Jonah in the Old Testament? How as God put a call in his life to go to Nineveh, the Assyrian Empire, capital city, he ran from that call of God. He didn't want to go. In fact, he ran in exactly the opposite direction. Here now we find Elijah, because of the fear over Jezebel's threat of going after his life, runs into the wilderness. He runs in exactly the opposite direction, because you have to see, in order to get where Elijah ends up, he had to leave the northern kingdom, go south, due south, all the way through the kingdom of Judah, and down into the wilderness beyond the southern borders of Judah. He ran the opposite direction from Mount Carmel God intended him to go, which was Jezreel. He let the unexpected outcomes in Jezreel divert him from the call of God in his life. Brothers and sisters, when we encounter unexpected turns and circumstances, it is a time where we are going to be tempted to move away from the call that God has placed on our life. God instead is challenging you and I, keep obeying me, keep trusting me, keep moving forward with my call on your life. Don't let confusing circumstances, unforeseen snags and obstacles, don't let those things divert you from the clear call that I have on your life, the clear direction. Because when we choose to run from God, to run from his call on our lives, we undercut our spiritual walk. Yet, running and hiding is the normal response, sadly, of believers to unexpected circumstances, to discouraging times, to fear. They run, they hide, Sometimes they hide from other believers. Frequently, when people get discouraged in their life and low, they don't want to go to church. They don't want to be around believers. They just want to be up by themselves. They sort of curl up in a ball, emotionally at least, and spiritually, and they don't want to be interacting with people. And God yet calls for them to keep moving forward. But the temptation is going to be to run, to pull back from what God has called for us to do. 2 steps that we've looked at today, consciously chosen by Elijah, to begin to move from faith into fear, and secondly, to allow his fear to lead him to abandon the clear call of God on his life. Don't let those steps occur in your life. And if they have, go back up the stairs. Join me tomorrow as we continue to look at these slippery steps into the pits.